Get out of my son's life, and this $50,000 is yours. Genevieve slid the thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany table until it stopped inches from my water glass. The fire crackled in the hearth behind me, casting long shadows across the dining room. I looked at the cash, then at her smug face. Her husband Richard smirked as he took a sip of his wine, waiting for me to take the money and run, like the poor, desperate woman they thought I was. Without breaking eye contact, I picked up the envelope. I could see the triumph in their eyes, but it was short-lived. I stood up, walked over to the fireplace, and tossed the envelope straight into the flames. "Mrs. Miller," I said calmly, as the bills began to curl and turn to ash, $50,000 does not even cover the weekly interest on my savings account. My name is Jordan, and at 33 years old, I learned that money screams, but wealth whispers. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had someone judge you by your appearance while underestimating your true worth. 2 hours before I burned their bribe, I was driving my silver 2005 Honda Civic down the winding roads of Greenwich, Connecticut. The muffler rattled loudly with every turn, a stark contrast to the silence of the luxury electric cars gliding past me. This car was the last thing my father left me before he passed, and I kept it to remind myself of where I came from, no matter how many millions sat in my bank accounts. As I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the Miller estate, I rolled down my window. A uniformed security guard stepped out of the booth, his eyes scanning the dented bumper and the peeling paint on my hood. Before I could even say hello, he held up a hand. "Deliveries and DoorDash need to use the service entrance around the back," he said dismissively, turning away. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am not a delivery driver. I am here for dinner with the Miller family. I am Preston's girlfriend." The guard turned back slowly, looking me up and down with a sneer that made my skin crawl. He picked up his phone and dialed the main house, keeping his eyes on my faded sweater. A moment later, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I looked down, expecting an apology from Preston or a code to open the gate. Instead, the message from my boyfriend made my stomach drop. "Babe, I can see your car on the security camera. Do not park in the driveway. The neighbors are watching, and that car is an eyesore. Park a block away and walk up." I stared at the screen, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He was not worried about my safety or comfort. He was worried about his image. I took a deep breath, put the car in reverse, and backed away from the gate. If they wanted a show, I was about to give them a performance they would never forget. I parked my Honda Civic 2 blocks away, behind a cluster of overgrown hedges, just as Preston had demanded. Walking the quarter-mile back to the estate in 3-inch heels was not part of my plan for the evening, but I refused to let them see me sweat. The driveway wound through the property like a snake, lined with ancient oak trees that probably cost more to maintain annually than most families earn in a decade. As I walked, the gravel crunching loudly beneath my shoes, I could feel the lenses of the security cameras tracking my every move. It was designed to make visitors feel small, and it was working. By the time I reached the massive double oak doors of the main entrance, my feet were aching, but my resolve was harder than ever. The heavy doors swung open before I could even reach for the brass knocker. A butler stood there, a man with silver hair and a nose positioned so high in the air, I wondered how he saw where he was walking. He did not step aside to let me in. Instead, he stood blocked the threshold, his eyes raking over my outfit with open disdain. I was wearing a vintage Chanel tweed suit from the 1995 collection. To a fashion historian or a serious collector, it was a museum piece worth upwards of $12,000. It was understated, elegant, and timeless. But to this man, who likely only judged value by the size of a logo, it probably looked like something I had dug out of a donation bin. "Service entrance is around the back, miss," he droned, his voice dripping with boredom. "The caterers are already setting up in the kitchen." "I am not the help," I said, keeping my voice level as I stepped forward, forcing him to move or be trampled. "I am a guest of Preston." He actually sniffed in disapproval, as if my very presence was polluting the air of the foyer. "Very well," he muttered, closing the door behind me with a heavy thud. He didn't offer to take my coat. He simply turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing alone under a crystal chandelier that looked like it cost more than my college tuition. Preston appeared from the drawing room a moment later. I expected a smile. I expected a hug or an apology for making me walk in the cold. I expected him to tell me I looked beautiful. Instead, he was checking his watch, tapping his foot on the marble floor. "You are late, Jordan," he hissed, closing the distance between us. I could smell the scotch on his breath. He didn't greet me. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the lapels of my jacket, yanking them straight with a force that bordered on aggressive. His fingers grazed my neck, rough and impatient. "And look at this," he muttered, smoothing down a wrinkle that didn't exist. "Is this really the best you could do? Mom hates sloppy people. You look like you just rolled out of bed." I stood frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs. The man I had been dating for 2 years, the man who claimed to love my simplicity, was now looking at me like I was a stain on his carpet. "Do not say anything stupid tonight," he warned, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Dad lost a massive golf bet today, and Mom is on a warpath about the floral arrangements. They are in a foul mood. Do not talk about your little junk business. Do not bring up your student loans. Just smile, eat your food, and agree with everything they say. Do you understand?" I looked into his eyes, searching for the Preston I thought I knew. But all I saw was fear. He was terrified of his parents, and he was using me as a shield. I wanted to scream that my little junk business had just acquired a collection that his father had been bidding on and failed to win. I wanted to tell him that I had paid off my student loans 5 years ago, but I bit my tongue. The trap was set and I wasn't going to spring it too early. "I understand," I said quietly. "Good." Preston exhaled, not even waiting for me as he turned back toward the drawing room. "Now come on, and try to look like you belong here." The drawing room was a cavernous space filled with furniture that looked like it was forbidden to sit on. Genevieve Miller was perched on a velvet chaise lounge, sipping from a delicate porcelain cup. She did not stand up when we entered. She did not even set down her saucer. Her eyes flicked over me like I was a smudge on her pristine window. So she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "This is the girl who collects scrap metal that you told us about, Preston." I felt a flash of irritation, but forced a polite smile, masking the urge to roll my eyes. "Actually, Mrs. Miller, I own an estate liquidation firm. I specialize in appraising and auctioning high-value historical artifacts and rare collectibles." "Oh, please," a booming voice interrupted from the corner. Richard Miller stood up from his leather armchair holding a cigar that smelled like burning money. He walked over, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hard wood. "You dig through dead people's basements hoping to find something shiny. Let us call a spade, young lady. You are a professional dumpster diver." He stopped right in front of me, looming over me to emphasize his height. "Just do me a favor. Do not touch anything while you are here, specifically that blue and white vase on the pedestal behind you." I turned slightly to look at the vase. It was a Ming Dynasty-style jar, likely a late 19th century reproduction. The glaze was too glossy, and the foot rim was machine-cut, meaning it was worth maybe $800 at a generous auction, but Richard clearly believed it was a national treasure. "That is a genuine Ming artifact from the 15th century, Richard declared, puffing out his chest. "If you break it, you could sell your little junk business and work for the rest of your life, and you still would not be able to pay me back." I wanted to laugh in his face. I wanted to tell him that I had sold a real Ming vase just last week for $200,000, and I knew exactly what the real thing looked like. But I kept my mouth shut, playing the role they had assigned me. "It is beautiful, Mr. Miller," I said, instead lowering my eyes submissively. "I will be very careful. See that you are—" Genevieve chimed in, finally setting down her tea. "And Preston, tell her to stop staring at the carpet. It makes her look guilty of something. God, I hope she did not track mud in from that hike up the driveway." Preston nudged me hard in the ribs. "Sorry, Mom. Jordan is just overwhelmed. She has never been in a house like this before. Her apartment is, well, it is cozy." "Small," Genevieve corrected. "The word you are looking for is small. and cramped. I suppose that is what happens when you do not have a trust fund to fall back on. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. They talked about me like I wasn't even in the room, like I was a stray dog Preston had brought home for show and tell. "Dinner is in 10 minutes, Richard said, turning his back to us. "Go wash up, and for heaven's sake try to do something with your hair. You look like you just walked through a wind tunnel." As they walked away, leaving us standing there, I looked at Preston, waiting for him to defend me, to say that my hair looked fine or that his parents were being rude. But he just sighed and adjusted his cufflinks, avoiding my gaze. "I told you they were in a mood," he whispered. "Just go to the powder room and fix yourself. And do not take too long. Mom hates waiting." We moved further into the living room where another couple was waiting by the wet bar. I recognized Preston's younger sister Courtney immediately. She was sitting on a high stool scrolling through her phone, while a tall, broad-shouldered man stood silently beside her holding a crystal decanter. Courtney did not look up when we approached. Instead, she just snapped her fingers in the air without taking her eyes off the screen. "Malik, more ice. You know I hate it when the vodka gets watery. Chop chop." The man she addressed as Malik did not flinch. He simply set down the decanter, picked up the silver ice tongs, and carefully added 3 cubes to her glass. His movements were precise and graceful, almost rhythmic. He was dressed in a suit that fit him perfectly, but the way he was being treated made him look like hired help, rather than a member of the family. Preston pulled me forward, his grip on my arm tight. "Courtney, you remember Jordan, right?" Courtney finally looked up. Her eyes scanned me with the same dismissal her mother had used. "Oh, right. The recycler." She gave a short fake laugh and turned back to her drink. "Nice to see you again. Malik, get them drinks too. I do not want to hear Preston complaining about being thirsty." I watched as Malik moved to prepare a scotch for Preston. There was a quiet dignity about him that seemed out of place in this room full of loud insecurities. I stepped closer to the bar, ignoring Courtney's rudeness. "Hi," I said, extending my hand to him. "I do not think we have actually met properly. I am Jordan." He paused, surprised that I was acknowledging him. He wiped his hand on a napkin before shaking mine. His grip was firm and his skin was warm. "I am Malik. It is nice to meet you, Jordan." "Malik is my husband," Courtney interjected, sounding bored. "Though sometimes I wonder why I married him. He is always so serious, probably from spending too much time at that depressing hospital." I looked at Malik with genuine interest. "You work at a hospital. Are you a doctor?" Malik smiled a small, sad smile. "Yes. I am a neurosurgeon. I specialize in spinal trauma and complex brain tumors at Mount Sinai." My eyebrows shot up. Mount Sinai? That was one of the top hospitals in the country. Being a neurosurgeon there meant he was elite, brilliant, and incredibly disciplined. Wow, that is amazing. You must be incredibly busy. "Oh, please." Courtney rolled her eyes, taking a large gulp of her vodka. "Do not encourage him. He is just a glorified mechanic for brains. It is not like he owns the hospital. He just works there. Daddy says real men sign the front of the checks, not the back." "Right, Malik." Malik's jaw tightened. I saw a muscle twitch in his cheek, but he kept his voice even. "If you say so, Courtney." He handed Preston his drink, and then poured a glass of sparkling water for me without me even asking. He had noticed I was not drinking alcohol. He was observant, smart, and clearly suffering. Our eyes locked for a brief second. In that moment, I saw the exhaustion behind his polite demeanor. I saw a man who was brilliant in his field, but was being reduced to a servant in his own home because he did not come from old money, and because of the color of his skin. He saw something in me, too. Maybe he saw the way I held my head high despite his wife's insults. Or maybe he just recognized another outsider trying to survive in a tank of sharks. "Here is your water, Jordan," he said softly. "Surviving this dinner requires hydration." "Thank you, doctor," I said, emphasizing his title. Courtney let out a scoff. "Doctor. Please. Malik, go check on the appetizers. Mom is going to have a fit if the crab cakes are cold." As Malik walked away toward the kitchen with his head held high, I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. They were treating a man who saved lives for a living like he was nothing. But I also felt a spark of hope. I was not the only one in this room who saw through the Miller family's facade. And if things got ugly tonight, which I knew they would, I had a feeling Malik would be the only one standing on the right side of history. We finally moved to the dining table, a long mahogany masterpiece that could easily seat 20 people. Richard took his place at the head of the table, commanding the room like a king holding court. He snapped his fingers, and the butler immediately brought over a dusty wine bottle, cradling it as if it were a newborn baby. Richard took the bottle, inspecting the label with a theatrical seriousness before looking directly at me. "I assume you are more accustomed to light beer or perhaps boxed wine from the gas station," Richard said loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear. "But tonight you are in for an education. This is a Chateau Margaux 1996. It is a premier cru from Bordeaux." "Do you know what that means, Jordan?" I nodded slowly. "It means it is a first-growth wine. One of the best." Richard scoffed, clearly disappointed that I knew the terminology. He poured a small amount into his own glass, swirled it aggressively, and took a sip, closing his eyes in exaggerated ecstasy. Then he poured a glass for me, filling it a bit too high as if daring me to spill it. "Go on," he urged, leaning back in his chair. "Taste it. Tell me what you detect. And please do not say grapes." I picked up the crystal glass, holding it by the stem. The color was a deep brick red, which was appropriate for its age. But the moment I brought the glass to my nose, I knew something was wrong. Instead of the complex notes of blackcurrant truffle and smoky tobacco that a 96 Margaux should have, there was a distinct pungent smell. It smelled like wet cardboard and a damp basement. I hesitated. The wine was corked. It was a chemical reaction called TCA that happens when the cork is infected with a specific fungus. It ruins the wine regardless of the price tag. "Well," Richard boomed, impatient, "we are waiting. Is it too sophisticated for your palate, Mr. Miller?" I said carefully, setting the glass down without taking a sip. "It is certainly a complex wine. However, I believe this particular bottle might be corked. There is a strong note of wet cardboard on the nose, which usually indicates TCA contamination. Perhaps we should open another bottle for safety." The table went silent for a heartbeat, then laughter erupted. It started with Courtney and was quickly joined by Genevieve and Richard. They laughed as if I had just told the most ridiculous joke in history. Corked Richard wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "She says the Margaux is corked. Oh, that is rich. Listen to me, young lady. That is called earthiness. It is the terroir. It is the soil of France. Of course you would think it smells bad. You probably think truffle oil smells like dirty socks, too." Genevieve shook her head, picking up her fork. "It is wasted on her, Richard. Just let her drink water. She clearly does not have the breeding to appreciate a $1,000 bottle of wine." I looked at Preston, hoping he would step in. He had taken a sommelier course with me last year. He knew what corked wine smelled like. But he just glared at me, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Just drink it, Jordan," he hissed under his breath, kicking my shin under the table. "Stop trying to act like you know things. You are embarrassing me." I looked at the glass of spoiled wine in front of me. Then I looked at Preston, who was happily sipping his own glass, pretending the vinegar taste was nectar just to please his father. I realized then that they did not care about the quality. They only cared about the label. They would drink poison if it came in an expensive bottle. I picked up my water glass instead. "You are right," I said, forcing a smile. "It is an acquired taste. I think I will stick to water tonight. I need to keep a clear head." Richard took his seat at the head of the table like a monarch ascending a throne. Genevieve sat to his right, and Courtney took the seat to his left. I naturally moved toward the empty chair beside Preston, assuming that as his girlfriend of 2 years, I would be seated next to him. I placed my hand on the back of the velvet chair, ready to pull it out, when Genevieve's voice stopped me cold. "Not there, dear," she chirped, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "That seat is for potential investors only. We need to keep the upper end of the table clear for business discussions. You know grown-up talk." She pointed a manicured finger toward the far opposite end of the table where the lighting was dimmer and the tablecloth seemed to end abruptly. You will be sitting down there next to Malik. I looked at the spot she was indicating. It was literally right next to the swinging double doors that led to the kitchen. Every time a server came in or out the door would inevitably graze the back of the chair. It was the kind of seat you gave to a misbehaving child or an unwanted relative you were hoping would leave early. But Preston, I started looking at him for support. We always sit together. Preston did not even look up from his napkin. Just do as she says, Jordan. It makes sense. We have a lot of numbers to go over tonight regarding the merger. You would just be bored. Genevieve smiled, a tight, predatory smile. Exactly. Besides, it is much more convenient for you to sit down there. You are out of the way. When the help comes in to clear the plates, they will not have to reach over the important guests. You understand, do you not? It is just logistics. The insult was so blatant, it almost knocked the wind out of me. She was effectively saying that Malik and I were obstacles that needed to be moved so the real people could eat in peace. I tightened my grip on my clutch, fighting the urge to walk out right then and there. But I remembered the plan. I remembered who I really was. Of course, I said, my voice icy. I would hate to be in the way of important people. I walked the long length of the table feeling like I was crossing a desert. The distance between Preston and me grew with every step until I finally reached the exile zone. I sat down next to Malik, who was already settled in his chair staring at his empty plate. As I sat, a server burst through the kitchen doors behind me, causing a draft of cold air to hit my neck. The door swung back, missing my head by inches. Welcome to the kids' table, Malik murmured without looking up. His voice was low so only I could hear. Watch your elbows. The servers move fast and they do not stop for casualties. I looked up the table. Preston was laughing at something his father said, clinking his crystal glass against Richard S. He looked comfortable. He looked like he belonged there. And he looked completely unbothered by the fact that he had just allowed his parents to segregate his girlfriend and his brother-in-law like second-class citizens. At least the view is interesting, I whispered back to Malik, unfolding my napkin. From back here, you can really see the strings on the puppets. Malik cracked a smile, the first real one I had seen all evening. You are tougher than you look, Jordan. Most people would have cried by now. I am not most people, I replied, watching Genevieve motion for the first course to be served. And the night is still young. I have a feeling the entertainment is just beginning. The first course arrived in silence. It was a lobster bisque, rich and creamy, served in bone china bowls with gold rims. I waited for the hostess to begin. Genevieve picked up her spoon and dipped it into the soup, moving it away from herself with practiced precision. I followed suit, mimicking her movement perfectly. I had attended finishing school in Switzerland during my gap year, a fact Preston did not know because he never asked about my education. I knew exactly how to eat soup, but facts did not matter to Genevieve, only humiliation did. She set her spoon down with a sharp clatter and sighed loudly, looking at Preston with a pained expression. Preston, do you remember Tiffany? Preston froze his spoon halfway to his mouth. Tiffany. You mean Senator Vance's daughter? Genevieve nodded, her eyes drifting to the ceiling as if recalling a saint. Yes, Tiffany. Such a delightful girl. She had such grace. She knew how to handle silver from the time she was 3 years old. It was natural to her, like breathing. She never made a sound when she ate. She turned her gaze slowly toward me, her eyes narrowing with disgust. And then we have this. It is painful to watch, really. Look at her, Preston. She holds her spoon like she is shoveling dirt in a garden. It is so aggressive, so heavy-handed. I stopped eating. My hand was steady. My posture was perfect. I was holding the spoon exactly as etiquette dictated. She was lying just to belittle me in front of the staff. Mrs. Miller, I started to say, keeping my voice calm. I believe I am eating quite normally. Do not talk back to me, she snapped. I know what I see. You eat like you are afraid someone is going to snatch the bowl away from you. It is desperate. It ruins my appetite. I looked at Preston, waiting for him to correct her. He knew I had impeccable table manners. We had eaten at Michelin-star restaurants together, where I had taught him which fork to use. But he just looked down at his bisque, stirring it nervously, avoiding my eyes. "Mom is right," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "You have to understand, Mom. Jordan did not grow up like us. She grew up in a really rough neighborhood." My heart went cold. I grew up in a quiet middle-class suburb. It was not wealthy, but it was certainly not a slum. Preston was lying, rewriting my history to make himself look like a savior, and me look like a charity case just to please his mother. Preston raised his voice, slightly gaining confidence from his mother's nod of approval. "People where she comes from focus on survival, not etiquette. They did not have soup spoons or fish knives. They probably just used plastic ones. You have to cut her some slack. She is trying her best to imitate us." Genevieve let out a short, cruel laugh. "Imitate? Yes, that is the perfect word. Like a monkey wearing a suit. It is almost cute if it were not so tragic." She picked up her spoon again, signaling the conversation was over. "Well, try not to slurp, dear. The acoustics in here are quite good, and I would hate to hear your digestion over the music." I stared at the bisque, feeling my appetite vanish completely. Across the table, Malik clinked his spoon against his bowl, loudly drawing their attention for a split second, giving me a chance to breathe. He did not say anything, but the look in his eyes said it all. "Do not let them break you." The main course arrived on silver platters. It was filet mignon paired with truffle mashed potatoes and asparagus. As the servers placed the plates down, Richard tapped his knife against his wine glass, demanding silence. He looked around the table with a swollen sense of pride, his face flushed from the wine he insisted was excellent despite my earlier warning. "I have an announcement," he boomed, slicing into his steak with aggressive strokes. "As of this morning, the papers are being drawn up for the merger of Miller Industries. We are looking at a valuation of $50 million. Genevieve clapped her hands together delightedly. "Oh, Richard, that is marvelous. We should look into buying that summer house in the Hamptons finally." $50 million, Preston repeated, his eyes widening. "Dad, that is incredible. I knew you could pull it off." Richard chewed his meat slowly, savoring the admiration. "It takes a certain kind of mind to handle that level of capital. You have to be ruthless. You have to be a visionary." He swallowed, and then turned his gaze all the way down to the end of the table, where I sat next to the kitchen door. "It is a different world, isn't it, Jordan?" he called out, raising his voice so I could hear him over the distance. "I bet you have never even seen a check with more than 3 zeros on it." I placed my fork down calmly. "Actually, Mr. Miller business has been quite good recently." Richard let out a short bark of a laugh. "Good. What does good mean in your world? Did you find an extra $20 bill on the sidewalk? Tell me honestly, with gas prices the way they are, does your little business even cover the fuel for that Honda Civic of yours? Or does Preston have to pay for your tank every time you go out?" I felt Malik shift uncomfortably beside me, but I kept my expression neutral. "I pay for my own gas, thank you. In fact, I just closed a very significant deal this week. It was a complete estate liquidation for a client in the city." Richard rolled his eyes. "A significant deal. What did you sell? A collection of old beer cans? Maybe some rusted bicycles from the 1980s? The table erupted in laughter again. Even the servers looked away, trying to hide their discomfort. It was actually a collection of pre-war French furniture and rare manuscripts. I said, my voice steady but quiet enough that they could ignore it if they wanted to. And they did. Richard waved his hand, dismissing my comment entirely. "Beer cans and old newspapers. That is what I heard. You see, everyone, this is the difference between us and them. We build empires. They scavenge through our leftovers." He pointed his steak knife at Preston. "You need to be careful, son. You are going to be heir to a $50 million company soon. You need a partner who understands high finance, not someone who thinks a garage sale is a board meeting." Preston nodded vigorously. "I know, Dad. I am trying to help her get on her feet." I looked at Preston. He was not helping me get on my feet. He was currently driving a car that I paid the insurance on because he claimed his cash flow was tight. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it along with the steak. They were celebrating a $50 million merger that I knew for a fact was built on a house of cards. My company had already flagged Miller Industries as high risk 2 weeks ago, but I let them enjoy their moment. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. Richard wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, leaving a smear of red wine sauce on the white fabric. He seemed bored with tormenting me for the moment, and his predatory gaze shifted down the table to Malik. "I saw that new Porsche in the driveway," Malik Richard grunted, pointing his fork at his son-in-law. "A Cayenne Turbo, right? That is $150,000 car." Malik stopped cutting his steak. He looked up slowly, his expression guarded. "It is the hybrid model, Richard. I needed something reliable for the commute to the city, especially with the winter shifts coming up." Reliable, Richard sneered. "Reliable is a Toyota. A Porsche is a statement, and it is a statement you cannot afford to make." He turned to Courtney, who was busy texting under the table. "Courtney, did you authorize this purchase? I thought we agreed you would keep a tighter leash on the household spending." Courtney sighed, dropping her phone onto the table. "I told him it was too flashy, Daddy. But he insisted. He said he earned it. Can you believe that?" Richard laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Earned it. That is rich. Malik, you are a doctor at a non-profit hospital. You are basically a civil servant. Let us be honest here. You bought that car with my daughter's trust fund money, the money my father worked himself into an early grave to build." I saw Malik's hand tighten around his steak knife until his knuckles turned ashen. "I paid for it myself, Richard," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Every cent. I have not touched Courtney's account in 5 years. Do not lie to me, boy." Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You think I do not know what doctors make? You are barely scratching middle class. You are living a lifestyle that my family provides for you. You are a leech, Malik, a leech with a fancy car." The insult hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked at Preston, expecting him to defend his brother-in-law. Preston knew how hard Malik worked, but Preston was busy inspecting his fingernails, terrified of drawing his father's fire. I could not take it anymore. The injustice was burning a hole in my chest. "Actually, Mr. Miller," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "that is factually incorrect." Richard S. head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with disbelief that I had dared to speak. "Excuse me." I sat up straighter, locking eyes with the tyrant at the head of the table. I said, "Your math is wrong. Malik is not just a resident. He is a senior attending neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai. I know their pay scales because my firm handles asset management for several of their board members." I took a sip of water and continued calmly. "The base salary for a surgeon of Malik's tenure and specialization is a minimum of $600,000 a year, and that does not include bonuses or consulting fees. He earns more than enough to buy 2 of those Porsches cash without ever asking your daughter for a dime. In fact, statistically speaking, he is likely the highest earner at this table right now, aside from you." The silence that followed was deafening. Courtney's mouth fell open slightly. She looked at Malik as if seeing him for the first time, then quickly masked it with a scowl. Richard S.'s face turned a deep shade of purple. He looked from me to Malik and back again. He opened his mouth to shout, but realized he did not have a counter-argument. "You do not know what you are talking about," Richard finally sputtered, waving his hand dismissively. "You are just a guest here. You do not know how this family works." "I may be a guest," I replied, holding his gaze, "but I know how a balance sheet works, and I know talent when I see it. You should be proud of him instead of counting his pennies." Genevieve let out a sharp gasp. "Richard, are you going to let this girl insult us in our own home?" Richard narrowed his eyes at me, his hatred now fully cemented. "You have a very big mouth for someone with such a small bank account. Enjoy your steak, Jordan. It will be the last expensive meal you ever eat." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. It descended on the dining room like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds of their humiliation. Richard stared at me, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth, frozen in a state of shock. Genevieve looked as though she had just swallowed a lemon. Her lips pursed so tightly they had practically disappeared. They were not used to being corrected, especially not by someone they considered a peasant. Courtney was the first to shatter the quiet. She slammed her crystal wineglass down onto the table with such force that wine sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth crimson. Her face was flushed a patchy, angry red. "Who asked you?" She spat, her voice shrill and piercing, echoing off the high ceilings. "You have some nerve coming into my parents' house and lecturing us about our own family finances. You do not know anything about us. You do not know how the world works." I remained calm, folding my hands in my lap. I was not lecturing Courtney. I said, my voice steady. I was simply stating a verifiable fact. Your husband is a top-tier surgeon. He does not need your father's charity. Courtney narrowed her eyes into slits. "Oh, I get it now. You are jealous, aren't you? It is written all over your face. You are sitting there in your second-hand clothes dating my brother, who clearly has not proposed yet, and you are envious. You are jealous that I have a husband who actually provides a lifestyle you can only dream of. You are jealous that we have status." She let out a cruel laugh. "Stick to your garage sales, Jordan. Leave the complex financial discussions to the adults. You are just embarrassing yourself trying to sound smart." Suddenly, I felt a sharp, blinding pain shoot up my left arm. Preston had reached under the table and grabbed my wrist. His fingers were not gentle. They were digging into my skin, grinding my bones together with a vice-like grip. It was not a warning squeeze. It was an act of physical aggression designed to silence me through pain. I turned to look at him. His face was inches from mine, his eyes wide and frantic with panic. The sweat was beading on his forehead. "Shut your mouth," he hissed through clenched teeth, his voice a venomous whisper that only I could hear. "You are ruining everything. Stop talking about money. Stop talking about Malik. Just shut up and eat your food before my father throws you out." The pain in my wrist was intense, but the clarity it brought was even sharper. I looked at the man I had spent 2 years with. I saw the cruelty in his grip. I saw the cowardice in his eyes. He was not protecting me. He was physically hurting me to protect his potential inheritance. He was willing to bruise me to keep his father happy. I did not pull away. I did not wince. I simply stared at him with cold, dead eyes until the discomfort of my gaze became too much for him. He slowly loosened his grip, but he did not let go completely, keeping his hand on my arm as a threat. I slowly pulled my arm back, rubbing the spot where his fingernails had dug in. There would be bruises there tomorrow. Deep purple marks shaped like his betrayal. "I am sorry," I said to the table, my voice devoid of any warmth or apology. I did not realize that the truth was a forbidden topic at this dinner. "I will keep my knowledge to myself from now on." Richard grunted, seemingly satisfied that his son had put the dog back on its leash. "Good. See that you do. Now pass the salt. The steak is under-seasoned." To break the heavy tension, Genevieve clapped her hands together theatrically. She reached under the table and produced a sleek, dark wooden box, pushing it across the white tablecloth toward Preston. Her smile returned, plastered on, tight and fake. "We wanted to give you this now, Preston," she announced, beaming. "A little token of our appreciation for stepping up as CEO. We know how hard you have been working on this merger." Preston wiped his mouth and opened the box. His eyes went wide. He gasped dramatically, lifting the watch out of its cushion. "Mom, Dad, is this a Nautilus?" Richard leaned back, looking satisfied with himself. "Patek Philippe Nautilus, reference 5711. Stainless steel with the blue gradient dial. The waiting list is 8 years long for normal people, but for the Miller family, let us just say we have connections." Preston strapped the watch onto his wrist, holding it up to catch the light from the chandelier. "It is beautiful. Thank you so much. This is incredible." I looked at the watch. It was indeed a stunning design. The Gerald Genta shape was iconic, but as Preston turned his wrist, my eyes automatically locked onto the dial. It was a professional reflex. I had appraised 3 of these in the last month alone. Nice watch, I said instinctively, my appraiser brain taking over for a split second. The 5711 is a classic. But the date window font looks a little bold for the 2020 model. Usually the serif is thinner on the one. I stopped myself immediately realizing what I had done. I bit the inside of my cheek, wishing I could pull the words back. The room went quiet again. Genevieve stared at me with her mouth slightly open. Richard slowly turned his head, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice dropping an octave. "Are you criticizing a $100,000 timepiece?" "No," I said quickly, looking down. "I just meant it is a very unique design." "No, that is not what you meant," Richard challenged, leaning forward. "You said the font was bold. You were inspecting it, like it was one of your flea market finds." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "Listen to her, everyone. The girl who drives a 20-year-old Honda is critiquing Patek Philippe. Tell me, Jordan, have you ever even held a real luxury watch in your hand? Or do you just see them in magazines while you are waiting in line at the grocery store?" I have seen a few," I stammered, playing the part of the cowed girlfriend. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump again. "A few. Do not make me laugh. You would not know a Patek from a Timex if it hit you in the face. This is Swiss engineering at its finest. It was sourced by my personal jeweler." I looked at the watch again. I could see from here that the brushing on the bezel was slightly uneven, and the blue of the dial was a shade too purple. It was a high-end replica, a super clone, probably cost about $600. His personal jeweler had either scammed him or Richard knew it was fake and was lying to his son. Judging by the sweat on Richard's upper lip, I guessed the latter. "Go on then," Richard goaded, pointing at the watch. "Tell us more, oh wise expert of trash. What else is wrong with it? Or are you done pretending you belong in this conversation?" I took a deep breath. "It is a lovely gesture, Mr. Miller. I am sure Preston loves it." "Exactly," Richard spat. "He loves it because he knows quality. Unlike some people who only know the price of scrap metal. Now shut up and let my son enjoy his gift." Preston admired the fake watch on his wrist, avoiding my gaze entirely. "It is perfect, Dad," he said. "Absolutely perfect." I picked up my water glass, hiding a small, knowing smile. If that watch was the symbol of their family empire, then the Miller dynasty was exactly what I thought it was. A shiny, convincing fraud. Genevieve suddenly slammed her hand down on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "That is enough," she announced, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "I cannot sit here and watch this charade for one more second. It is exhausting pretending that this situation is acceptable." She reached into her designer handbag, which had been sitting on the floor beside her, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it across the table. It slid over the polished wood, knocking over the salt shaker, before coming to a stop right in front of my water glass. Preston stopped eating his fork, hovering halfway to his mouth. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, though he did not sound surprised. He sounded resigned. "I am doing what needs to be done," Preston, Genevieve snapped, not looking at him. Her eyes were locked on me, cold and hard. "Open it, Jordan. Go ahead." I looked at the envelope. It was heavy. I knew exactly what was inside because I had seen this move in bad movies a dozen times. But I reached out and lifted the flap anyway. Inside, stacked neatly, were bundles of $100 bills. "There is $50,000 in there," Genevieve said, leaning back in her chair with a look of supreme satisfaction. "All in cash, untraceable, tax-free." I stared at the money and then up at her. "You want to buy me off?" "I want you to be realistic," she corrected. "Look at that money, Jordan. Really look at it. That is more money than you make in 2 years of digging through other people's trash. That is life-changing money for a girl like you." She waved her hand in the air, gesturing vaguely at my existence. "Think about what you could do with that. You could finally get rid of that embarrassing car and buy something that does not sound like a lawnmower. You could buy some clothes that actually fit. You could even send some back home to your parents. I am sure they have debts. People from your background always have debts. Maybe you can finally fix that leaking roof or whatever it is poor people worry about. I felt the blood rush to my face. My parents were retired professors living in a paid-off mid-century modern home in Vermont. They did not have a leaking roof. But Genevieve did not know that because she had never asked. She just assumed that because I was not wearing diamonds, I must be destitute. This is a one-time offer, Genevieve continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You take that envelope and you walk out that door right now. You get in your little car and you drive away and we never see you again. You leave Preston to find a woman who fits into his world, a woman who can help him run a $50 million company, not someone he has to apologize for. She took a sip of her wine, watching me over the rim of the glass. Do not be stupid, Jordan. Do not let your pride get in the way of a payday. You and I both know you are only with him for the security. Well, here is your security. Take it. I looked at Preston. He was staring at the tablecloth, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew this was happening. He might have even helped them count the money. The betrayal stung more than her insults. Is this what you want, Preston? I asked, my voice quiet. You want me to sell us for 50 grand? Preston finally looked up. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. It is a lot of money, Jordan. You should take it. It is for the best. For the best, I repeated. Genevieve checked her watch. You have 5 minutes to decide before I put that money back in my bag and call security to escort you out for trespassing. And if I have to do that, you leave with nothing. So be a smart girl. Take the cash. Save yourself. I looked at Preston, waiting for him to explode. I waited for him to stand up and tell his mother that she was out of line. I waited for him to grab my hand and storm out of the house with me, leaving their dirty money behind. I had spent 2 years supporting him, listening to his dreams, soothing his insecurities about his father, and helping him navigate corporate politics. I thought that meant something. I thought we were a team. But Preston did not stand up. He did not look at me with love or even with pity. He reached for his wine glass, his hand trembling slightly, and drained the entire contents in one long, desperate gulp. He set the empty glass down on the table with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. He took a deep breath, staring at the centerpiece of white lilies before finally turning his head to face me. His eyes were cold, empty, and completely devoid of the warmth I used to see in them. Jordan. He said, his voice steady, but lacking any emotion. Mom is right. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I had been punched in the stomach. Excuse me, I whispered, hoping I had misheard him. You should take the money. He continued, his tone becoming more clinical, as if he were discussing a contract dispute rather than our relationship. $50,000 is a generous offer. It is a lot more than you would get if we just broke up normally. Think of it as a severance package. Severance package. The words hung in the air, ugly and corporate. He was reducing 2 years of my life to a failed business transaction. Preston. I said, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and rage. I am your girlfriend. I am the woman you said you wanted to marry last week. That was before the merger was finalized, he interrupted, cutting me off with a wave of his hand. Things are different now, Jordan. I am going to be the CEO of a $50 million company. The stakes are higher. I need a partner who fits into this world. I need a wife who brings assets to the table, not liabilities. He gestured at me, at my vintage suit, at my lack of jewelry, at the invisible price tag his family had placed on my head. Look at you, Jordan. You are sweet, and you have been fun, but let us be honest. You are a burden. I cannot bring you to board meetings. I cannot introduce you to investors. You do not know how to play the game. I need someone who can help me climb, not someone I have to drag up the mountain with me. He reached out and pushed the envelope closer to me, his fingers brushing against the thick stack of bills. Just take it. It is a win-win. I get my future back and you get paid. You can go back to your simple life and find someone simpler. Someone who drives a Honda and thinks Olive Garden is fancy. That is where you belong. I stared at him. The man I loved had vanished, replaced by a shallow carbon copy of his father. He was weak. He was pathetic. And he was trying to buy his freedom because he was too much of a coward to just break up with me like a man. A burden, I repeated slowly, testing the weight of the word. You think I am a burden? It is just the truth. Preston shrugged, turning back to his empty plate. Do not make a scene, Jordan. Just take the cash and go. It is the best deal you are ever going to get. I looked around the table. Genevieve was smirking. Richard looked bored. Courtney was texting again. They all thought they had won. They thought they had crushed me. But as I looked at Preston's weak chin and his fake watch, I felt something inside me shift. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. You are right, Preston, I said quietly, reaching for the envelope. This is a transaction, and I always close my deals. I slowly lifted the heavy manila envelope from the table. The paper felt rough against my fingertips. Across the room, Genevieve let out a long exhale, her shoulders dropping as if a great weight had been lifted. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes dancing with victory. Good girl, she purred. I knew you were smart. Now do not make a scene on your way out. Just slip out the back. Richard nodded approvingly, stabbing another piece of steak. You made the right choice. No hard feelings. It is just business. Business, I repeated. My voice was different now. It was no longer the soft, apologetic tone of the girl who drove a Honda. It was the voice I used when I walked into a boardroom to dismantle a failing company. It was cold, sharp, and dangerous. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor, echoing in the silent room. Preston did not look up. Not look. He was too busy, relieved that his problem was solving itself. I walked past him. I walked past the center of the table. But I did not walk toward the door. I walked toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated the far wall. The flames were roaring, dancing hungrily behind the iron grate. Genevieve frowned. Jordan, the exit is the other way. I ignored her. I stood in front of the fire, feeling the heat on my face. It felt cleansing. I looked at the envelope in my hand one last time. $50,000. To them, it was a weapon. To me, it was an insult. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed the envelope into the heart of the fire. For a second, nothing happened. Then the paper caught. The edges curled black, and suddenly the entire package burst into bright orange flames. The sound of the room changing was immediate. Richard choked on his wine. Genevieve screamed, dropping her fork. What are you doing? Richard roared, scrambling out of his chair. Are you insane? That is $50,000. I turned around slowly to face them. The fire crackled behind me, framing my silhouette. I was not smiling kindly anymore. I was smiling like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. That I said, pointing to the burning money, was pocket change. It does not even cover the interest on my savings account for a single week. Preston stared at me, his mouth hanging open. Jordan, have you lost your mind? No. Preston, I said, smoothing down my vintage Chanel jacket. I have found it. You said you wanted a partner who understands high finance. You said you wanted to talk about assets and liabilities. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. I walked back to the table, but I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table, right next to Richard, looming over him. You want to talk about money? I asked, my voice low and steady. Let us talk about money. Let us talk about real money, not this allowance you dangle in front of people to make yourself feel powerful. Let us talk about solvency. Let us talk about debt. And let us talk about who actually owns the chair you are sitting in right now. Richard's face turned a deep shade of crimson. Get out, he sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at the door. Get out of my house before I call the police. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Your house. Are you sure about that, Richard? Because usually when you miss 3 mortgage payments, the bank starts to get a little possessive. And I would hate for you to be trespassing on bank property. The room went deathly silent. Richard went pale. How did she know? The fear in his eyes was the first honest thing I had seen all night. And I was just getting started. I turned away from Richard, leaving him stewing in the panic of my revelation. I had said my piece. I had burned their bribe, and I had exposed their financial fragility. There was nothing left for me to do but get in my car and drive back to my life where people paid their bills and told the truth. I adjusted my purse strap on my shoulder and took my first step toward freedom. But I did not make it 3 steps before a piercing shriek shattered the silence. My bracelet. My diamond bracelet. It is gone. Genevieve was standing up, knocking her chair over in the process. She was clutching her bare wrist, her eyes wide with a panic that looked almost convincing, if you did not know her better. She began frantically sweeping the napkins and silverware off the table, searching for the jewelry she knew perfectly well was not there. Crystal glasses tipped over, spilling wine like blood across the white linen. Richard blinked, shaking off his stupor regarding the mortgage. "What do you mean gone, Genevieve? You were wearing it 5 minutes ago." "I took it off because it was snagging on the tablecloth," Genevieve cried. "I set it right here next to my wine glass, and now it has vanished." The room descended into instant chaos. Courtney jumped up, checking under the table. Preston looked around helplessly. But I stood still. I knew exactly where this was going. I could feel the script playing out before the actors even delivered their lines. This was the contingency plan. Plan B. If money did not make me leave, shame and fear would. Genevieve stopped searching. Her head snapped up, and her eyes locked onto me like a missile locking onto a heat source. Her expression shifted from panic to pure venomous accusation. "It was her," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "It was the beggar. She took it." I sighed, turning back to face them, keeping my posture relaxed. "Mrs. Miller, I have been standing 10 feet away from you. I have not touched your jewelry. I have been at the other end of the table all night, remember? The kids' table. Do not lie to me, you little thief," Genevieve yelled, stepping around the table to advance on me. "You walked right past my chair when you went to the fireplace to burn that money. You bumped into me. I felt it. You used that distraction to swipe it." It made twisted sense in her narrative. To them, only a criminal would burn $50,000. Only someone who had already stolen something worth much more would be so arrogant as to destroy cash. Richard stepped in front of the double doors blocking my exit. His face was red and his fists were clenched. He saw a lifeline. If I was a thief, then everything I said about his mortgage and his debts could be dismissed as the ramblings of a criminal. He could regain control. He could discredit me. "Nobody leaves this room." Richard barked, his voice booming off the walls. "You are not going anywhere until we find that bracelet." "She has it in her bag," Genevieve shouted, pointing at my vintage quilted purse. "I saw her eyeing it all night. She probably thinks she can sell it to pay off her student loans." "She is desperate, Richard. Look at her clothes. Look at her car. Only a desperate person comes into a house like this and acts the way she does." Preston stood by the table watching his parents corner me. He looked torn for a split second before his survival instinct kicked in. He chose the winning side. "Jordan," he said, his voice shaking, "if you took it, just give it back. Please, don't make this worse than it already is. Just put it on the table and we can forget this happened." I looked at him with pity. It was not me making this worse. It was them digging their own graves one shovel of dirt at a time, and they had no idea I was about to bury them in it. Richard pulled a walkie-talkie from his belt, which seemed absurdly out of place for a dinner party, but perfectly in character for a man obsessed with control. "Security report to the dining room immediately," he barked into the device. "We have a situation." The double doors swung open almost instantly. The same guard who had sneered at my car earlier marched in, followed by another man who looked like he spent more time lifting weights than reading books. They flanked Richard, crossing their arms over their chests, creating a wall of muscle between me and the exit. "This is ridiculous," I said, gripping the strap of my quilted purse. "You are holding me against my will." "That is unlawful imprisonment." "It is a citizen's arrest," Richard countered, stepping closer until I could smell the stale wine on his breath. "You are on my property, accused of grand larceny. Empty the bag, Jordan." Dump it out on the table right now. And maybe, just maybe, we will not press charges. We will just ban you from ever setting foot in this town again. I looked at Preston. He was standing by the sideboard, leaning against it, as if he were watching a tennis match rather than his girlfriend being threatened. He had his arms crossed, looking at the floor. Preston, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Are you really going to let them do this? You know I did not take anything. Preston finally looked up. His face was pale, but his eyes were hard. Jordan, if you did not take it, then you have nothing to worry about. Just open the bag. Show them it is empty. It is about principle, Preston. I argued, tightening my grip on the bag. This is my private property. They have no right to search me without a warrant. Oh, save the legal mumbo-jumbo for the public defender, Richard spat. You are scared because you got caught. Come on, Jordan. Preston pleaded, his voice taking on a whining tone. Please do not make them call the cops. Think about how that would look. Police cars in the driveway, neighbors watching. It would be so embarrassing for everyone. Just give the bracelet back and we can all go home. Embarrassing. That was his concern. Not that I was being framed, not that his parents were acting like mobsters, but that the neighbors might see blue lights. I refuse, I stated firmly, looking Richard dead in the eye. I will not open my bag. If you want to see what is inside, you will have to force me. And I warn you, Mr. Miller, if your men touch me or my property, you will regret it. Richard laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Is that a threat? You think you can sue us? You cannot even afford a lawyer. He turned to the guards and nodded his head toward me. Seize the bag, dump it. The first guard stepped forward, reaching out with a massive hand. I took a step back, but I was cornered against the fireplace. Do not touch me, I warned, my voice dropping an octave. The guard ignored me. He grabbed the strap of my purse. I held on to it for a second, creating a struggle just long enough for the cameras to capture the aggression. Just long enough to prove that I had resisted. Then I let go. The guard ripped the bag from my grasp with such force that I stumbled back against the mantel. There, Richard sneered. Now let us see what the little rat has been hiding. The guard reached for my bag again, his fingers inches from the quilted leather. I braced myself for the violation of privacy, ready to scream, but before his hand could make contact, a deep voice boomed from the other end of the table, stopping him in his tracks. Wait. It was Malik. He was standing up now, his napkin clutched in his hand, his face tight with conflict. He looked from me to his mother-in-law, his chest heaving with the effort of defying the matriarch. Mom, stop this, Malik said, his voice shaking slightly, but gaining volume. This has gone too far. You cannot search her bag. Genevieve whipped her head around, her eyes, narrowing into dangerous slits. Excuse me, Malik, are you defending a thief? Are you siding with the person who stole from this family? Malik took a deep breath. She is not a thief, Mom, and the bracelet is not missing. I saw you take it off. The room went dead silent. Even Richard looked at his wife with a flicker of confusion before masking it quickly. Courtney looked horrified, dropping her phone onto the table. Malik had just broken the cardinal rule of the Miller family. He had spoken the truth. I saw you, Malik continued, pointing a trembling finger at Genevieve. When Jordan went to the fireplace, you slipped the bracelet off your wrist. I saw you put it in your pocket. You are setting her up. Genevieve walked slowly toward Malik. She did not look like a mother. She looked like a viper, coiled and ready to strike. She stopped right in front of him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look down at her. Malik, she said, her voice dangerously low, almost a whisper. You are very tired. The hospital shifts are getting to you. You are hallucinating. No, I am not, Malik insisted, though. His voice wavered. I know what I saw. Check your pocket, Mom. Genevieve laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little man. You live in my house, you eat my food, and your reputation at Mount Sinai relies heavily on the donations my friends make to the hospital board. Do you really want me to call Chief of Surgery Dr. Arrington tonight? Do you want me to tell him that his star neurosurgeon is having a mental breakdown and attacking his own family at a dinner party? Malik went pale. He knew she would do it. She was petty enough and powerful enough to burn his career to the ground just to win an argument. Genevieve stepped closer until she was whispering directly into his ear, but in the silence of the room, we could all hear it. If you say one more word, Malik, you will be out on the street. No home, no wife, no career. Is this girl really worth losing everything for? Malik stood there for a second longer, his hands trembling at his sides. He looked at me, his eyes filled with apology and shame. He wanted to help, but the noose around his neck was too tight. Slowly, painfully, he sank back into his chair and lowered his head, fixing his gaze on his empty plate. Good choice. Genevieve sneered, patting him patronizingly on the shoulder. Now that the peanut gallery is closed, let us get back to business. She turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of triumph. Empty the bag, Jordan. Or do I have to let my security team do it for you? Genevieve lost what little patience she had left. She shoved the security guard aside with surprising strength. Her face twisted into a mask of pure malice. I am done playing games, she screeched. She lunged forward and ripped the quilted leather bag from my shoulder. The strap dug into my skin before snapping free, leaving a red welt that began to throb immediately. She did not just open the bag. She desecrated it. She grabbed the bottom corners and shook it violently upside down over the polished parquet floor. The contents of my life rained down in a humiliating shower of personal effects. First came my wallet, a worn leather bifold that I had bought at a thrift store years ago. Then came a tube of drugstore chapstick that rolled under the table. My car keys followed, hitting the wood with a heavy clatter, the Honda logo clearly visible on the taped-up fob. Next fell a small, tattered notebook bound in black leather, its pages yellowed and dog-eared. And then came the sound they were all waiting for, clink. A heavy metallic sound followed by a shimmer of light. There, lying amidst my humble belongings like a snake in the grass, was the diamond tennis bracelet. It lay coiled next to my scuffed keychain, sparkling aggressively under the dining room chandelier. Aha! Genevieve shrieked triumphantly, pointing a shaking finger at the jewelry. I knew it. I told you, Richard. I told you she was a thief. Look at it. Caught red-handed, the room seemed to shrink. The air was sucked out of the space, leaving only the heavy weight of accusation. Richard stepped forward, a smug grin spreading across his face. He looked like a hunter standing over a trapped animal. Well, 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 Richard boomed, looking down at the scattered items with disgust. What do we have here? The innocent act is over, Jordan. We have the motive, the opportunity, and now we have the evidence. Courtney gasped, covering her mouth with her hand though her eyes were dancing with excitement. Oh my God. I cannot believe she actually did it. That is a 20-carat bracelet. That is grand larceny. I looked at Preston. This was his moment. This was the moment where he could ask how the bracelet got into a zipped bag that had been on my shoulder the entire time. This was the moment he could point out that his mother had been the last one near me. But Preston just stared at the bracelet, his face a mixture of disappointment and relief. Relief that he finally had a valid reason to dump me. Relief that he did not have to be the bad guy. Jordan, he sighed, shaking his head. Why? Was the 50,000 not enough? You had to steal too. I did not answer him. I was too busy looking at the floor. I was not looking at the bracelet with fear. I was looking at it with the trained eye of a professional appraiser. I was looking at the way the light hit the stones. I was looking at the setting, and I was looking at the notebook that lay beside it, the notebook that Genevieve had so carelessly discarded. I bent down slowly, not to pick up the bracelet, but to pick up my notebook. Do not touch that evidence, Richard barked, stepping closer. Leave it exactly where it is until the police arrive. I stood up, clutching my notebook to my chest. I was calm, terrifyingly calm. I am not touching your bracelet, Richard, I said, my voice steady. I just wanted to make sure you did not damage my property, because unlike that bracelet, this notebook is actually valuable. Genevieve laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. Valuable, that piece of trash. You are delusional. You are going to jail, Jordan, and you are going to rot there. I looked at her, And for the first time that night, I let the mask drop completely. I let them see the predator beneath the prey. "You might want to save your breath, Genevieve," I said. "You are going to need it to explain to the police why you planted a fake bracelet on a guest." Richard stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching slightly on the debris of my spilled purse. He towered over me, casting a long shadow that was meant to intimidate. A wide, predatory grin stretched across his face, showing teeth that were too white to be natural. "Well, well, well," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Look at what we have here. Caught red-handed. I have to say, Jordan, I expected you to be smarter than this, but I suppose desperation makes people do foolish things." He gestured dramatically to the bracelet lying on the floor. "Do you know what the penalty is for grand larceny in the state of Connecticut?" he asked, his tone mockingly conversational. "For theft of property valued over $10,000, you are looking at a Class B felony. That is a minimum of 5 years in state prison. 5 years, Jordan. You will be 38 when you get out. Your youth will be gone. Your future will be over." Genevieve let out a satisfied huff, crossing her arms over her chest. "And do not think you will get off easy just because it is your first offense. We will press charges to the fullest extent of the law. We have zero tolerance for criminals in this house." I looked at Preston, hoping for a shred of decency, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would drop the act now that things had gone this far. But he just shook his head, his face a mask of practiced disappointment. He looked like a bad actor in a soap opera trying too hard to sell a scene. "I am so disappointed in you, Jordan," Preston said, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. "Why did you have to be so greedy? Was my love not enough? Was the life I was trying to give you not enough? You had to steal from my mother, too." I watched him closely. His eyes were not sad. They were shifting nervously, checking his father's reaction, making sure he was hitting his marks. He was not heartbroken. He was relieved. He finally had the perfect excuse to discard me without looking like the villain. "Greedy," I repeated slowly, testing the word. "You think I am greedy, Preston? You just burned $50,000. Preston sighed, avoiding my gaze. "And then you tried to steal a bracelet worth twice that amount. What else do you call it? You are out of control." Richard laughed again, a harsh barking sound. "She is not out of control, son. She is just showing her true colors. You cannot take the ghetto out of the girl, as they say. Now step aside. I am calling the police commissioner personally. I want her in handcuffs before dessert is served." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers tapping the screen with aggressive delight. I stood there clutching my notebook, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the threat of prison would make me beg. They expected me to fall to my knees and plead for mercy, to promise to leave town if they just let me go. But they had made a critical error. They had assumed I was ignorant. They had assumed that because I drove a Honda and wore vintage clothes, I did not know the value of things. They were about to learn that in my line of work, knowing the true value of an object was not just a skill, it was a weapon. "Go ahead, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through his triumphant moment. "Call the police. In fact, I insist. But before you do, you might want to double-check your math regarding that felony charge. Because if you file a false police report regarding the value of stolen goods, that is also a crime. And I have a feeling you are not ready for that conversation." Richard paused, his thumb hovering over the call button. "What are you babbling about now?" he sneered. I pointed to the bracelet on the floor. "You said that is worth over $10,000. You said it is a felony." "It is worth $20,000, Richard spat. "I bought it myself." "Then you were ripped off," I said calmly. "Or you are lying." "Which is it, Richard?" I slowly bent down to the floor, ignoring the way Richard loomed over me like a vulture waiting to strike. The room was silent, except for the heavy breathing of the security guard, who seemed unsure if he should tackle me or help me. They expected tears. They expected me to beg for mercy or offer to pay them back for a crime I did not commit. They wanted a breakdown, but I did not shed a single tear. I moved with deliberate, calculated precision, gathering my scattered belongings. I dropped my keys back into the torn bag. I wiped the dust off my lipstick tube. I picked up my wallet, checking to ensure my cards were still inside. Finally, I reached for the bracelet. Genevieve took a sharp step forward. "Do not touch that," she hissed. "That is evidence." I ignored her completely. I picked up the glittering chain, holding it by the clasp. I stood up slowly, dusting off the knees of my vintage trousers. I walked directly under the massive crystal chandelier in the center of the room, using the intense overhead light to my advantage. I brought the bracelet up to my eye, squinting slightly as I rotated it back and forth, letting the light hit the stones from multiple angles. "You said this cost $20,000, Richard?" I asked, my voice conversational and light as if we were discussing the weather. "Every penny," Richard growled, his thumb still hovering over his phone screen. "And I have the receipt to prove it." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "Then you were robbed blind." I held the bracelet out toward him but kept it out of his reach. "Look at the refractive index," I said, pointing to the center stone. "See this dispersion. See how it throws heavy rainbows of color instead of white light. We call this the disco ball effect in the industry. It is too fiery, too colorful." I pulled a small loop from my pocket. It was a tool I always carried, a habit from years in the trade. I heard Preston gasp, realizing for the first time that perhaps he did not know me at all. I peered through the glass, magnifying the stone 10 times. And here I continued, narrating my findings like a surgeon in an operating theater. Doubling of the back facets. You never see that in a diamond because diamonds are singly refractive. And the girdle is thick and uneven. I lowered the loop and looked Richard dead in the eye. "This is not a diamond, Mr. Miller. This is moissanite. It is a synthetic silicon carbide simulant. A decent one, I will give you that, but it is lab-grown and mass-produced in China." I tossed the bracelet onto the table. It landed with a hollow clatter that sounded nothing like the heavy thud of gold or platinum. It sounded cheap. "Market value is roughly $300, I stated flatly. "Maybe $350 if you still have the original box. So go ahead, Richard, call the police. But if you tell them this is grand larceny over $10,000, you are filing a false report. And if you plan to file an insurance claim for $20,000, well, that is insurance fraud, which is also a felony last time I checked." Genevieve went pale, her hand flying to her throat. She looked at the bracelet, then at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling, "is she telling the truth?" Richard did not answer. He was staring at the bracelet, his face draining of color, his bluster evaporating instantly. He knew. He absolutely knew. And now he knew that I knew. Genevieve looked as if she was about to explode. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her silk dress. She slammed her hands onto the table, leaning over the centerpiece, her eyes bulging with rage. "You are lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are a lying little peasant. I bought that piece in Paris. I paid $50,000 for it. Do not listen to her, Richard. She is just trying to confuse you with her cheap words. She is trying to devalue it so she does not go to prison." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, holding the bracelet up like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit A. "Paris, Texas. Maybe?" I replied, my voice cool and cutting through her shrieks. "Because no jeweler in Paris, France would sell a mass-produced setting like this without a Maker S mark. There is no serial number, Genevieve. There is no hallmark. It is gold-plated brass. It is costume jewelry." I took a step closer to Richard, who was still holding his phone, his thumb frozen over the dial button. "So here is your dilemma." I continued, locking eyes with him. "You have two options. Option A is that your wife is the victim of a very expensive scam, and she is too incompetent to realize she bought a fake. That makes her a fool." Richard's jaw tightened. He did not like that option. "Or," I said, raising a finger, "Option B, which I think is far more likely. You know exactly what this is. You bought a cheap prop to stage this little scene. And now you are knowingly lying to the police about its value to ensure I get a harsher sentence." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching the realization dawn on Richard's face. In the eyes of the law, Richard, that is called filing a false police report. It is a Class A misdemeanor. But since you are doing it to frame someone for a felony, it could be considered malicious prosecution. And if you have this item insured for $50,000 and you file a claim for it, well, that is insurance fraud. That is a federal crime. Richard slowly lowered the phone to his side. The screen went dark. He looked at the bracelet in my hand, then at his wife, who was now panting with exertion, her chest heaving. "Genevieve," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "Where is the receipt?" Genevieve froze. I have it filed away. Somewhere. I do not know. Why are you asking me that? She stole it. Call the police, Richard. Do you have the receipt? Genevieve? Richard roared, causing everyone in the room to jump. Or did you buy this at the mall? Genevieve stammered, her eyes darting around the room looking for an escape. I might have bought a replica. For travel. You know. So I would not lose the real one. But that does not matter. She still stole it. Theft is theft. I laughed. It was a sharp, victorious sound. And there it is. The admission. I tossed the bracelet back onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Preston. You heard her, I said to the security guards. She admitted it is a replica. So the value is negligible. Which means this is not grand larceny. At best, it is petty theft. But since you planted it on me, it is actually entrapment. I turned back to Richard, who looked like he was about to have a stroke. So go ahead, Richard. Make the call. I would love to explain to the officers why the Miller family is trying to frame a guest over a piece of costume jewelry. I am sure the local press would love that story too. Millionaire frames girlfriend with fake diamonds. It has a nice ring to it, does it not? Richard let out a guttural roar that sounded more animal than human. You smug little witch! He screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. He lunged across the space between us, his heavy hands reaching for my throat. The veneer of the civilized businessman had completely shattered, leaving only a desperate, violent man who realized he was losing control of his own kingdom. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply held up my hand, palm out, in a universal gesture of stop. Take one more step, Richard, I said, my voice ice cold. And I will add assault and battery to the list of charges. And unlike the insurance fraud, this one will not be a white-collar crime. You will not go to a minimum security facility with tennis courts. You will go to general population. The security guard, who had been ready to search me a moment ago, stepped forward, instinctively blocking Richard's path. Even he knew that assaulting a guest on camera was a line that could not be crossed without destroying everyone involved. Richard slammed into the guard's chest, breathing heavily, his face a mask of purple rage. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was already unlocked and dialing a number I had on speed dial for situations exactly like this. I held it to my ear, watching Richard freeze inches from me, his chest heaving with unspent rage. Counselor Brooks, I said into the receiver, keeping my eyes locked on Richard. It is Jordan. I am activating File 12, Alpha effective immediately. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire that had consumed their bribe money. Yes, that is correct, I continued, my voice crisp and professional. The Miller estate. Initiate the immediate recall of all outstanding loans and freeze the assets under the insolvency clause of the master lending agreement. They have demonstrated financial instability and attempted fraud. Richard's face went from angry to confused. Insolvency clause, he stammered, stepping back from the guard. Who are you talking to? You do not have a lawyer. You cannot afford a lawyer. I ignored him, listening to the voice on the other end. Thank you, Brooks. Send the notification to their digital inboxes now and contact the sheriff's department to oversee the asset protection. I am currently on site, and the debtor is displaying hostile behavior. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket with a finality that echoed in the room. It is done, I said, looking around the silent room. You might want to check your emails. What did you do? Richard whispered, his voice trembling. Who is Brooks? Brooks is the chief legal counsel for Hill Archives, I explained, smoothing down my jacket. And as of 30 seconds ago, he has executed a writ of attachment on this property and all associated holdings. You see, Richard, when you miss 3 months of payments on your commercial loans, the lender has the right to demand full repayment immediately. It is called an acceleration clause. And since I know you do not have $50 million lying around, you are now technically bankrupt. Genevieve let out a strangled sob, clutching her chest. You are lying. We are not bankrupt. We are merging. We are rich. I shook my head. You were merging. But no company merges with a bankrupt entity. The deal is dead, Genevieve, just like your reputation. Chào bạn, đây là phần tiếp theo của kịch bản. Đoạn 23 được viết bằng tiếng Anh tối ưu hóa cho dòng đọc AI, không tiêu đề, không ký tự, đặc biệt ngắt nghí bằng dấu câu chuẩn. Nội dung tập trung vào màn lật bài ngựa về danh tính thật sự của Jordan và cuốn sổ tay quyền lực. I walked over to where my tattered black notebook lay on the table. Genevieve had dismissed it as trash just moments ago, thinking it was nothing more than the scribbles of a poor woman. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the leather in my hand. It was old because I carried it everywhere. It was worn because it contained the secrets of the wealthiest and most irresponsible families on the East Coast. You called this garbage, I said, looking at Genevieve. You thought I was writing poetry or maybe a grocery list for ramen noodles. With a sudden flick of my wrist, I tossed the notebook onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy slap, sliding across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of Richard. The force of the throw caused it to flop open, revealing pages covered in dense handwritten rows of numbers, addresses, and names. Read it, Richard Weiss commanded. Tell me what you see. Richard looked down reluctantly. His eyes scanned the page, and I saw the color drain from his face instantly. He recognized the names. The Vanderbilts in Newport, the Astors in Manhattan, the estates that had quietly changed hands in the last 6 months. These are foreclosure listings, he stammered, looking up at me with confusion. These are high-end liquidations. They are my inventory, I corrected. I reached into the inner pocket of my vintage Chanel jacket. This time I did not pull out a phone. I pulled out a single card. It was made of thick, matte black cardstock with gold embossed lettering. It was heavy, expensive, and it commanded respect. I placed the card on the table and slid it forward with 2 fingers until it rested next to the notebook. Read the name, I said softly. Richard picked up the card. His hands were shaking so badly that the gold letters shimmered under the chandelier light. He read it out loud, his voice barely a whisper. Jordan Hill, CEO, Hill Archives and Liquidation. He dropped the card as if it were burning his skin. Hill Archives. He gasped, looking at me with fresh horror. You are the vulture. That is what they call you in the city. You are the one who buys distressed commercial debt from the major banks. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. I prefer the term asset manager, but vulture works too. I clean up the messes that people like you leave behind. You see, Richard, I do not dig through dumpsters. I buy bad debt. I buy the loans of arrogant people who spend money they do not have to impress people they do not like. I walked slowly around the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. My firm specializes in acquiring non-performing loans from banks that are tired of chasing debtors. Banks like Oak Haven. Does that name ring a bell? It should. You have been ignoring their calls for 3 months. Genevieve looked from Richard to me, her mouth agape. What is she talking about, Richard? What debt? She is talking about everything, Richard whispered, sinking into his chair. I leaned in close, resting my hands on the back of Preston's chair. I bought the Miller Industries debt package this morning for 60 cents on the dollar. It was a steal, really. The bank was desperate to get you off their books. They said you were difficult, delusional, and insolvent. So, technically, Richard, I am not just a guest in your home. I am your owner. Richard, staring at the black and gold business card in his hand, looked like a man trying to read his own death certificate. His fingers, which had been so steady when pointing accusations at me, were now trembling violently. The cardstock rattled against his thumb, a tiny sound that seemed deafening in the silent room. He looked from the card to me, then back to the card, blinking rapidly, as if trying to make the words change. "Hill," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You are that Hill. The Hill behind the Oakhaven Distressed Asset Fund." I leaned back against the edge of the dining table, crossing my ankles casually. "That is the one," I said. "We acquired Oakhaven's entire portfolio of non-performing commercial loans at 9 o'clock this morning. And do you know which file was right on top of the stack, Richard? It was yours." Richard swallowed hard, his Adam S. apple bobbing nervously. He looked up at me, and the arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. "You are holding 80% of my company's debt," he said, his voice barely audible. "You are the majority creditor." I nodded slowly. 82% to be exact. Which means that technically speaking, I own the building your office is in. I own the factory floor. I own the fleet of trucks your son drives. And as of this morning, I own the paper on this house too. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. He slumped back into his chair, the business card slipping from his fingers and fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. Jordan smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. "It is funny, isn't it, Richard? 10 minutes ago you called me a dumpster diver. You called me a scavenger. And just now you tried to have me arrested for stealing a $300 bracelet. You called the CEO of your primary creditor a petty thief. I have to wonder how you think that is going to play out during our restructuring negotiations." "Restructuring?" Richard choked out. "You are going to liquidate us." I walked over to the fireplace, watching the last embers of the envelope fade. "That depends," I said, turning back to face him. "Usually I am quite reasonable with debtors who are honest. I work with them. I help them reorganize. But you, Richard, you are not honest. You lie about your finances. You lie about your mergers. And you lie to the police to frame innocent women." Genevieve looked back and forth between us, her head spinning. "Richard, what does this mean? Is she the boss now?" "She is not the boss." Richard snapped at his wife, his fear making him vicious. "She is the executioner, Genevieve. She holds the mortgage. She holds the business loans. She can take everything." He looked at me, his eyes pleading now. "Jordan, listen. We can work this out. The merger is real, I swear. We just need a little more time. The capital is coming." I laughed, shaking my head. "The merger is a fantasy, Richard. I saw the due diligence reports. The other company walked away 3 weeks ago when they saw your balance sheet. You have been pretending the deal is alive to keep the bank off your back. But the bank sold the debt to me. And unlike the bank, I do not just look at spreadsheets. I look at character. And frankly, your character is bankrupt." Preston stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Jordan, wait. If you own the debt, that means you can save us, right? You can write it off. We are family, or we were going to be. You would not destroy your own boyfriend's inheritance, would you?" I looked at Preston and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, just a cold professional indifference. "I do not mix business with pleasure, Preston," I said. "And since you made it very clear earlier that our relationship was a business transaction, I am treating it as such. And let me tell you, it is a bad investment." Genevieve was vibrating with a mix of rage and denial. The financial talk was going over her head. She did not understand debt restructuring or foreclosure, but she understood theft. She clung to the accusation like a drowning woman clinging to a rock. "It does not matter," she screeched, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You can buy all the debt in the world, Jordan, but that does not change the fact that you are a thief. You stole my bracelet. You are going to prison, and no amount of money can save you from that. Officer, arrest her. She has the stolen goods in her possession." The security guards shifted their weight, looking uncertainly between Richard, who was currently hyperventilating over his lost company, and Genevieve, who was demanding handcuffs. They looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I sighed and took a step forward, raising my hands slowly to my chest. I tapped the small gold butterfly brooch pinned to the lapel of my vintage jacket. It looked like a charming piece of costume jewelry from the 1950s, the kind you might find in an antique shop for $20. Do you like this brooch, Genevieve? I asked, my voice calm and steady. She looked at me with confusion. Who cares about your cheap jewelry? You should care, I replied. Because this is not just a brooch. It is a high-definition wearable body camera disguised as a fashion accessory. It is a prototype from a security firm my company acquired last year. It records in 4K resolution with a 180-degree wide-angle lens. And it has a very sensitive microphone. Genevieve went still. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. In my line of work, I continued explaining it as if I were teaching a class, dealing with hostile debtors and high-value assets. I never enter a room without insurance. People lie. People hide assets. And sometimes people try to frame me. So I record everything. I pulled out my phone again and tapped the screen a few times. The device is connected to a cloud server via an encrypted signal. It uploads in real time. That means even if you smash this brooch or threw my phone in the fire, the footage is already safe on a server in Zurich. I turned the phone screen around so they could all see it. The video was crisp and clear. It showed the dinner party from my perspective. I scrubbed the timeline back to 10 minutes ago. Look here, I said, narrating the scene on the small screen. Here I am walking toward the fireplace. And here you are, Genevieve. See how you stand up. See your hand reaching into your own pocket. On the screen, Genevieve's movements were undeniable. The camera clearly caught the glint of the fake bracelet in her hand. It showed her waiting for me to pass. It showed her bumping into me, feigning a stumble. And perfectly captured in high definition, it showed her slipping the bracelet into the open top of my quilted bag. The room was silent as everyone watched the digital proof of her crime. That is what we call a smoking gun, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. You did not just lose the bracelet. You planted it. That is clear evidence of entrapment and filing a false report. I looked at the security guards. Gentlemen, I think you have seen enough to know who the real criminal is in this room. If you touch me or my property again, you will be named as accomplices in the lawsuit I am filing tomorrow. The guards immediately stepped back, raising their hands in surrender. We are just doing our job, ma'am, the head guard said, his voice respectful for the first time all night. We did not know. I turned back to Genevieve, who looked like she was about to faint. Her face was ashen. She leaned against the table for support, her legs giving out. So, Genevieve, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, do you want to keep talking about who is going to prison? Or would you prefer to start packing your bags? Preston looked at his mother, who was practically catatonic against the table, and then at his father, who was hyperventilating about bankruptcy. Then he looked at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He calculated the odds. He looked at the exit where the police would soon be entering, and then he looked at the woman holding the keys to his family's debt. He moved fast. He practically vaulted over the chair he had been sitting in, rushing toward me with his arms wide open. Jordan! Baby, wait! He gasped, stopping inches from me. I took a step back, my expression unreadable. Do not touch me, Preston. He ignored my warning and dropped to his knees right there on the Persian rug. He grabbed the hem of my vintage jacket, looking up at me with eyes that were suddenly wet with tears. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award for cowardice. Baby, you have got this all wrong, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I knew you were not a thief. I knew you were powerful. I was just playing along. I raised an eyebrow, looking down at the top of his perfectly gelled hair. You were playing along. Yes, exactly, he nodded vigorously. I had to make them believe I was on their side so they would let their guard down. I was undercover just like you. I was protecting you, Jordan. I knew you had a plan and I did not want to ruin it. Did you not see me winking at you across the table? He had not winked. He had glared. He had squeezed my wrist until it bruised. He had told me to take the money and leave. He had called me a burden. I looked down at him. He looked small, pathetic. A man who would sell his soul for a leased Porsche, and now was trying to sell his dignity for a second chance. So when you told me to take the $50,000 and disappear, that was part of the act. I asked, my voice flat. When you called me a liability, was that also for my protection? Preston swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Yes. No. I mean, I was testing you. I wanted to prove to my parents that you could not be bought. And you passed, baby. You passed with flying colors. I am so proud of you. He reached for my hand, trying to press it to his cheek. I love you, Jordan. I have always loved you. You are the smartest, most amazing woman I have ever met. We are a team, right? You and me against the world. We can run this company together. With your capital and my vision, we can be unstoppable. His vision. His vision was non-existent. He was a parasite looking for a new host. I pulled my hand away as if I had touched something slimy. Preston. Stop. Just stop. You are embarrassing yourself. But I love you, he cried, desperate now, clinging to my leg. You cannot do this to us. We are soulmates. I looked at him with cold detachment. No, Preston. You love the idea of a submissive wife who would clean up your messes, and now you love the idea of a rich girlfriend who can save you from poverty. That is not love, that is opportunism, and frankly, you are terrible at it. I stepped back, forcing him to release my leg. He fell forward onto his hands, looking up at me with the panic of a man watching his lifeline being cut. Get up, I said. You are ruining your suit. And since you are going to be unemployed in about 5 minutes, you might want to keep it in good condition for job interviews. I looked down at the man clutching my ankle. He was ruining the line of my trousers, but more importantly, he was ruining my patience. I did not kick him hard, but I used the toe of my vintage loafer to firmly shove his shoulder, pushing him away from me. He toppled backward onto his rear end, looking up at me with wide, shocked eyes, as if I had just slapped him. Get up, Preston, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. You look absolutely pathetic down there. And honestly, it is embarrassing to watch. He scrambled to his feet, dusting off his knees, his face flushing a deep mottled red. I was just trying to show you how much I care, Jordan. I do not care about the money. I do not care that you are poor. I laughed. It was a sharp bark of amusement that made him flinch. Poor. You still do not get it, do you? You see a Honda Civic in the driveway, and you see poverty. You see a woman who coupons, and you see desperation. That is because you are shallow, Preston. You have been trained to mistake flash for cash. I walked over to the window, looking out at my sensible, reliable car parked next to his gleaming leased Porsche. I drive that Civic because it has 200,000 miles on it, and it has never once failed to start, I said, turning back to face him. I drive it because I value reliability over ego. I drive it because while you are paying $3,000 a month to lease a car, you do not own to impress people you do not like. I am investing that money into high-yield bonds and distressed real estate. I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space. You asked me earlier if I could afford gas. You made jokes about my income. So let us clarify the ledger right now so there is no confusion. I pulled up a banking app on my phone and held it out. I did not let him hold it. I just let him see the summary screen. Read the deposit for last month, I commanded. Preston squinted at the screen. His eyes went wide. $91,000. That is net, I said, pulling the phone away. That is after taxes. And that is just my take-home pay from commissions on the sales I closed last month. That does not include my equity stakes. That does not include my quarterly bonuses. And it certainly does not include the interest on my trust, which I have not touched since I was 21. I watched the realization wash over him. He was doing the math in his head, and the numbers were crushing him. I make $91,000 in a single month, Preston. I said, my voice low and hard. How much does your father pay you to sit in that glass office and play solitaire? 8,000. Maybe 10 if you are a good boy. I leaned in until I was whispering right in his face. I make 10 times the salary of a puppet director like you. I could buy your car, your wardrobe, and your apartment with 1 month's check and still have enough left over to buy out your country club membership. Preston looked like he was going to be sick. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. So do not ever pity me, I hissed. And do not ever assume that because I choose not to flaunt my wealth that I do not have it. I just prefer to keep it hidden from gold diggers, like you. The silence in the dining room was shattered by a sound that would haunt Richard Miller for the rest of his life. It started as a single ping from his phone, then another, then a rapid-fire barrage of chimes and vibrations that sounded like a slot machine paying out a jackpot of absolute disaster. Richard fumbled with the device, his fingers slick with sweat. He stared at the screen, his eyes widening with every notification that scrolled past. "What is happening?" he gasped, his voice trembling. Citibank. Account frozen. Chase. Line of credit suspended. American Express. Card cancelled due to high-risk activity. He looked up at me, terror etched into every line of his face. "They are freezing everything. My personal accounts, the business payroll, even the offshore holding company. How is this possible? It takes days to freeze assets." I leaned against the sideboard, pouring myself a glass of water with deliberate slowness. "Usually, yes," I replied, taking a sip. "But when you trigger a cross-default provision with a primary lender, it sends an automated alert to every other financial institution you do business with. It is called a cascade failure, Richard. And I just pushed the first domino." Genevieve grabbed Richard's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "Richard, stop looking at the phone. Tell her to leave. Tell her to get out of our house. This is our home. It is in my name. She cannot touch it." I set the glass down and looked at Genevieve with a pitying smile. "Actually, Mrs. Miller, that is a common misconception. You see, when Richard took out that emergency bridge loan 6 months ago to keep the factory from shutting down, he used this estate as collateral. He signed a deed in lieu of foreclosure." Richard turned on his wife. I had to Genevieve. It was the only way to make payroll. But the term was 5 years. We had 5 years to pay it back. He turned back to me, desperation creeping into his voice. "The contract says 5 years, Jordan. You cannot call the loan in early just because you are angry. That is breach of contract. I will sue you." I shook my head slowly, enjoying the moment. "You really should have read the fine print, Richard. Specifically, Clause 4, Section B, the preservation of reputation and moral conduct." I walked over to the table and picked up the fake diamond bracelet, holding it up to the light one last time. The clause states that if the borrower engages in criminal activity, fraud, or public behavior that brings disrepute to the lending institution, the lender reserves the right to accelerate the debt immediately. In plain English, Richard, it means, if you act like a criminal, I can take my money back. I dropped the bracelet onto the table with a final clatter. "You just attempted to frame the CEO of your lending institution for a felony. You committed insurance fraud on camera, and you attempted to file a false police report. You violated Clause 4, Section B about 5 times in the last hour alone." I checked my watch. "So I am exercising my right to call the loan. The total amount of $3.2 million is due immediately. Since your accounts are frozen and you clearly do not have the cash, I am seizing the collateral to satisfy the debt." I looked around the opulent dining room. "This house is no longer yours, Richard. As of this moment, it is the property of Hill Archives. You are trespassing." The weight of the foreclosure finally crashed down on Genevieve Miller. She stood frozen for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, looking at the velvet curtains she had imported from Italy and the crystal chandelier she had bragged about to her bridge club. The realization that she was standing in a house she no longer owned was too much for her fragile ego to process. With a strangled gasp, she clutched her chest. "Oh, my heart," she wailed. She swayed dramatically and then collapsed onto the Persian rug. It was a clumsy fall. She made sure to land near the chair leg to break her descent, proving that even in her darkest hour she was still performing for an audience. Mom, Preston shouted instinctively, reaching out but stopping short when he realized she was clearly faking it to avoid the conversation. Courtney did not even flinch. She did not rush to her mother's side. She did not call for water. Instead, she slammed her hands onto the table, her face twisted into a mask of pure, selfish fury. "Get up, Mother!" Courtney screamed, her voice piercing and shrill. Stop acting like a victim. You ruined everything. Genevieve's eyelids fluttered, but she stayed down, hoping the floor would swallow her whole. I mean it. Courtney continued, turning her rage on her father now. You two are idiots. Absolute idiots. You told me the company was fine. You told me my trust fund was secure. And now I find out you leveraged the house and bet my inheritance on a merger that does not exist. Richard looked up from where he was kneeling beside his wife, his face red with exertion. Watch your tone, Courtney. We did this for you. We did this to maintain the lifestyle you feel so entitled to. For me, Courtney laughed a harsh, bitter sound. You did this for your ego, Dad. You bought a new Bentley while the factory was failing. You threw this party to show off while the bank was calling. And you let Mom stage a felony in the dining room because you were too arrogant to admit you were broke. She pointed a shaking finger at Genevieve, who was now peering through one open eye. And you and your obsession with status. You just had to humiliate Jordan, didn't you? You could not just let her leave, you had to plant that bracelet. And now, because of your pettiness, we are going to lose everything. My condo, my car, my reputation. It is all gone because you are a vindictive old woman. Genevieve sat up abruptly, abandoning the fainting act. How dare you, she hissed, scrambling to her feet. I gave you everything, Courtney. I bought you your way into college. I bought you your husband. Do not lecture me about pettiness when you have never worked a day in your life. The family began to tear each other apart. Richard was shouting about ungrateful children. Genevieve was screaming about her sacrifices. Courtney was crying about her social life. Preston was trying to vanish into the wallpaper. I stood silently at the head of the table watching the implosion. It was a masterclass in dysfunction. As they screamed over the ruins of their empire, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small silver flask. I had brought it with me, knowing that the wine Richard served was always a cheap vintage he rebottled to look expensive. I uncorked the flask and poured a measure of aged single malt scotch into my unused water glass. The amber liquid swirled, catching the light. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. It tasted like victory. I watched them fight. I watched the people who had treated me like dirt for 2 years destroy each other over money they no longer had. It was the best dinner show I had ever seen. And the grand finale was just beginning. The sound of my glass hitting the mahogany table was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the cacophony of their screaming match. I waited for them to turn toward me. One by one they fell silent, realizing that the person they were ignoring held the power to end their entire world. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice calm and devoid of emotion. Because while this little family therapy session is fascinating, the clock is ticking. And unlike your mortgage payments, I do not grant extensions. I checked the vintage Cartier watch on my wrist. It is now 9 o'clock. You have exactly 60 minutes. By 10 o'clock, I want every single one of you off this property. Genevieve gasped, clutching her pearls. You cannot kick us out in the middle of the night. Where will we go? That is not my concern, I replied, pouring the last drop of scotch from my flask. You have friends. You have extended family. Surely one of the many socialites you brag about knowing will take you in. Unless, of course, your friendships are as bankrupt as your bank accounts. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a silver candlestick, weighing it in my hand. It was heavy. Sterling. Good for auction. Now let us be very clear about the rules of your departure. I continued, setting the candlestick down firmly. You are permitted to take your personal clothing and toiletries. That is it. Richard stepped forward, his face purple. Now hold on a minute. This is our furniture, our art. My grandfather bought that grandfather clock. Correction, I said, turning to face him. Your grandfather bought it, but you leveraged it. As of this morning, every stick of furniture, every painting, every rug, and every piece of jewelry in this house belongs to the liquidation portfolio of Hill Archives. It is all collateral against your defaulted loans. I pulled a folded document from my pocket and smoothed it out on the table. This is the asset inventory list filed with the court. It details every item of value in this house down to the silverware. My team will be here at 10:05 to verify the contents against this list. I looked at Genevieve, who was already eyeing the china cabinet. Do not even think about it, Genevieve. If a single fork is missing, if one crystal glass is out of place, if I see so much as a throw pillow in your suitcase, I will have you arrested for theft of corporate property. And unlike the bracelet incident this time, the charges will stick because I have the paperwork to prove ownership. Courtney looked at her phone. My car. Can I take my car? Is the lease in your name or the company name? I asked, knowing full well the answer. She looked down, biting her lip. The company. Then leave the keys on the table, I said. You can take an Uber. Preston looked at me with those sad puppy dog eyes that used to work on me. Jordan, please. My laptop has all my personal photos on it. Does it also contain company emails and proprietary data? I asked. Because if it does, it is a company asset. Leave it, Preston. You can buy a USB drive and copy your photos later under supervision. Until then, it stays here. I clapped my hands once, startling them all. You are wasting time. You have 55 minutes left. I suggest you start packing. And remember, I have cameras everywhere, so pack light, pack honest, and get out of my house. The room was a chaotic scene of panic and denial. Richard was shouting into his phone, trying to reach a lawyer who would not pick up. Genevieve was weeping over her collection of porcelain figurines, terrified of leaving them behind. Courtney was frantically shoving silverware into her purse until I cleared my throat loudly, reminding her of the inventory list. She dropped the fork with a clatter, looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. But amidst the swirling disaster, one person stood perfectly still. Malik was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, watching the family he had married into crumble. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had spent years holding up a collapsing roof, only to realize the house was empty all along. Dr. Khan. I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Malik looked up, surprised that I was addressing him with his professional title. The Millers only ever called him Malik, or occasionally that leech. I have one last piece of business to discuss. I continued, walking over to where he stood. As part of the liquidation of Miller Industries, my firm is acquiring several subsidiary assets, including the land leases for the private medical complex downtown. Malik narrowed his eyes slightly, not understanding where this was going. Okay. So, you are my landlord now, too. Not exactly, I corrected. Hill Archives is pivoting that asset into a new venture. We are launching a chain of premium concierge clinics. We have the capital and the infrastructure, but we lack the leadership. We need a medical director who actually cares about medicine, not just billing codes. I pulled a crisp document from my folder. It was not a seizure notice. It was an employment contract. The position pays a base salary of $500,000 a year. I stated clearly so Courtney could hear every word. Plus a 5% equity stake in the company vesting immediately. Full benefits. And complete autonomy over hiring. Courtney froze. Her head snapped toward us. You cannot be serious, she shrieked. You are offering him a job. He is my husband. He is on our side. I looked at Malik, ignoring Courtney completely. It is a legitimate offer, Dr. Khan. No games, no family drama. Just good medicine and a partner who respects your expertise. What do you say? Malik looked at the contract in my hand. Then he looked at Richard, who was sweating through his shirt. He looked at Genevieve, who was clutching a vase like a life raft. And finally, he looked at Courtney, who was staring at him with the same entitlement she had worn all night. Malik, she hissed. Do not you dare take that paper. She is the enemy. We are going to sue her. We are going to get everything back. You need to stay here and support me. Malik looked at his wife. For the first time in years, the fog seemed to lift from his eyes. Support you, he repeated softly. Like you supported me when your mother called me a thief. Like you supported me when your father mocked my salary. He slowly raised his left hand. He gripped the platinum wedding band on his finger. It was tight. It had always felt like a shackle. With a firm twist, he pulled it off. Courtney gasped. Malik, what are you doing? I am resigning from this family, Malik said, his voice gaining strength. He tossed the ring across the room. It hit the table right in front of Courtney, bouncing once before settling amidst the debris of their dinner. "You should keep that," he said coldly. "You are going to need the money for a divorce lawyer." He turned back to me, a genuine smile breaking across his face. It was the smile of a free man. 5% equity, he asked. 5%, I confirmed, extending my hand. Malik shook it firmly. "Then I accept." "When do I start?" "Right now," I said, handing him the file. "You can help me supervise the eviction." Malik laughed, a loud, rich sound that filled the room. "It would be my pleasure, boss." Courtney screamed his name one last time, but Malik did not even flinch. He walked to the head of the table, picked up a glass of water, and toasted the ruins of the Miller Empire. "Toodles," he said, mocking Genevieve's earlier tone. "I have work to do." I walked out into the cool night air, taking a deep breath to fill my lungs with oxygen that did not smell of expensive perfume and desperation. The heavy oak front door of the Miller estate loomed behind me, a barrier between my future and their collapse. I could still hear the muffled sounds of shouting from the dining room, but out here on the gravel driveway, it was peaceful. My Honda Civic sat faithfully in the shadows, parked next to the lineup of luxury vehicles that the Millers used to project their illusion of wealth. I reached into my purse for my keys, ready to leave this chapter of my life in the rearview mirror. But I did not make it to the door handle before I heard the frantic crunch of footsteps on gravel. "Jordan, wait. Please wait." I turned slowly. Preston was running toward me. He had lost his jacket somewhere inside and his dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He looked disheveled, frantic, and utterly pathetic. He skid to a halt a few feet away from me, his chest heaving. "Baby, please," he gasped, reaching out a hand but stopping short of touching me. "You cannot just leave like this. We need to talk." "There is nothing to talk about, Preston," I said, leaning back against the door of my car. "I think I made my position very clear inside." "No. You made a point," Preston argued, running a hand through his hair. "And I get it. Okay, I get it. You are powerful. You are rich. You wanted to teach us a lesson about humility." Message received, loud and clear. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to that wheedling tone he used when he wanted something. "But now that the lesson is over, we can get back to reality. You and me. We are good together, Jordan. Think about it. With your capital and my connections, we could run this town. We could be a power couple." I looked at him and I felt a wave of exhaustion. He still did not understand. He thought this was a game. He thought I was negotiating. "Your connections," I repeated. "Preston. Your connections are people who liked you because your father threw good parties. Those people are going to disappear the moment the bankruptcy notice hits the papers tomorrow. You have no connections. You have liabilities." "I am not a liability," he pleaded. "I am the director of operations. I know this company inside and out. You need me, Jordan. You cannot run Miller Industries without a Miller." I laughed softly. "That is where you are wrong. I can run it much better without a Miller skimming off the top." I pushed off my car and walked past him toward the gleaming silver Bentley Continental GT parked under the floodlights. It was a beautiful machine, a $200,000 symbol of everything that was wrong with his family. "Nice car," I said, running a hand along the hood. "Is this the 2024 model?" Preston blinked, confused by the sudden change of subject. Yeah, it is. I just got it last month." "Why? Do you like it? We can take it for a spin if you want." I walked around to the driver's side and held out my hand, palm up. "The lease is in the company name, correct?" I asked. Preston nodded slowly. "Well, yes. Technically, it is a corporate vehicle for executive transport. Then it is a company asset," I said, my voice hardening. "And since Hill Archives now owns the controlling interest in Miller Industries and holds the lien on all rolling stock, this car belongs to me." Preston stared at my open hand. "What?" I wiggle my fingers, impatient. "The keys." "Preston, hand them over." But how am I supposed to get around?" he stammered, clutching his pocket. "That is not my problem," I replied. "You can take the bus. Or maybe you can ask your mother for a ride in whatever vehicle she manages to salvage from the liquidation. But this car stays here. It is going to auction on Monday to help pay down the debt you racked up." He did not move. He just stared at me with his mouth open. "Preston," I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a command. "Give me the keys, or I will have the security team come out here and retrieve them. And I think we both know they are not on your payroll anymore." With a shaking hand, Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy key fob. He dropped it into my palm. The metal was warm from his body heat, but it felt cold to me. "Thank you," I said, pocketing the key. "Now regarding your position as Director of Operations. I have reviewed your performance metrics. You have missed every target for the last 4 quarters. Your department is bleeding money, and your attendance record is abysmal." I smoothed down my jacket and looked him in the eye. "So effective immediately, your employment with Miller Industries is terminated with cause. You are fired, Preston." "Fired," he whispered. "You are firing me from my own family company." "It is not your family company anymore," I reminded him, opening the door to my Honda. "It is my company, and I do not keep dead weight on the payroll." I got into my car and started the engine. The reliable hum of the Honda filled the silence. I rolled down the window one last time. "Good luck, Preston," I said. "You are going to need it." I pulled out of the driveway, leaving him standing alone in the dark, next to a Bentley he could not drive in front of a house he could not keep. I did not look back. I sat in the driver's seat of my Honda Civic with the engine idling, but I did not put the car in gear just yet. I watched Preston standing alone in the driveway, his silhouette slumped in defeat against the backdrop of the mansion he had just lost. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches. But the lesson was not quite over. Suddenly, the dark country road leading up to the estate was flooded with blinding white light. It started as a low rumble that vibrated through the chassis of my car and grew quickly into a roar. Preston shielded his eyes, stumbling back as a convoy of vehicles turned into the long driveway. It was an armada of efficiency. First came 2 matte black armored SUVs, their tires crunching heavily on the gravel. They flanked the entrance, blocking any escape. Behind them rolled 3 massive transport trucks. They were pristine, painted in a deep charcoal gray with the silver logo of my company emblazoned on the sides. Hill Archives and Liquidation. The letters caught the floodlights, shimmering with a corporate authority that made the Miller S. Bentley look like a toy. The convoy came to a precision halt. The air brakes of the trucks hissed in unison, a mechanical sigh that signaled the end of the Miller dynasty. Doors opened simultaneously. 12 men and women stepped out. They were not dressed in moving clothes. They wore sharp black uniforms with gold badges. They carried tablets, scanners, and heavy-duty locking cases. This was not a moving crew. This was a forensic asset recovery team. My assistant Elena stepped out of the lead SUV. She was dressed in a tailored suit, holding a clipboard with the kind of authority that usually terrified junior executives. She scanned the scene, noting the location of the vehicles and the open front door of the house before walking directly to my car. She tapped on my window gently. I rolled it down. "Good evening, Ms. Hill," Elena said, her voice crisp and professional. "The transition team is ready to deploy. We have the sheriff deputies securing the perimeter at the main gate. Do we have clearance to begin the seizure?" I opened my car door and stepped out one last time. Preston watched me, mouth agape, as my staff deferred to me with absolute respect. He saw the way they straightened their posture when I looked at them. He saw the fear in their eyes, not of abuse, but of disappointing me. "Clearance granted," I said loud enough for Preston to hear. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy iron key ring I had confiscated from the foyer table on my way out. It held the keys to the front door, the wine cellar, the garage, and the safe in Richard S. office. I dropped the keys into Elena S. waiting hand. "Secure the premises," I commanded. "I want a full forensic inventory of every room. Start with the master bedroom and the safe. Document everything. If there is a scratch on the floorboards, I want a photo of it. If there is a dollar bill in a coat pocket, I want it logged." Elena nodded, tapping the command into her tablet. "Understood. And the personal effects. Give them 20 minutes, I said, checking my watch. After that, anything left inside becomes property of the estate. And Elena, make sure you count the silverware twice. I looked at Preston, who was trembling by the fender of the Bentley. Especially the soup spoons, I added, my voice cold. I was told recently that I do not know how to use them properly, so I want to make sure we do not lose a single one. Elena did not smile, but her eyes flickered with understanding. We will account for every teaspoon, Ms. Hill. She turned to the team and raised her hand. Move out. Section A takes the ground floor. Section B, secure the vehicles. Go. The team swarmed past Preston, ignoring him completely as they marched toward the house. He was no longer the heir to the throne. He was just an obstacle in the driveway. I got back into my car and closed the door, shutting out the noise of the takeover. I did not look back at him. I put the Honda in reverse and backed out of the driveway, leaving the Millers to the mercy of my accountants. I handed the keys to my Honda Civic to one of the uniformed guards. Take this to the secure garage, I instructed him, and be careful with the transmission. It sticks in second gear. The guard nodded respectfully, slipping into the driver's seat of my old, reliable disguise. Beside him, a sleek midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up its tires, crunching softly on the gravel. This was my real car. The car I took to board meetings. The car that intimidated bank presidents. Elena opened the rear door for me. I gestured for Malik to slide in first. He hesitated for a second, looking at the hand-stitched leather seats and the lamb's wool floor mats before climbing inside. I followed him, and the heavy door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the cold night air and the sounds of the foreclosure. Inside it was quiet. The kind of expensive silence that money buys. Malik looked around, running a hand over the wood veneer on the door panel. So this is the real Jordan Hill, he said, letting out a long breath. This is the commute, I corrected, pressing a button to raise the privacy partition. The real work starts tomorrow, Dr. Khan. I hope you are ready for early mornings. Malik chuckled, leaning back into the seat. After 3 years in that house, I am ready for anything. The driver eased the car forward, gliding past the convoy of trucks that were still unloading equipment. We moved slowly down the long, winding driveway, the headlights cutting a bright path through the darkness. As we approached the main gate, I looked out the window. The iron gates were open, and the security team was already changing the locks. But just outside the perimeter, standing on the side of the public road, was a small, huddled group of people. It was the Millers. Richard was shouting into a cell phone that had likely already been disconnected. Genevieve was sitting on her Louis Vuitton suitcase, weeping into a silk handkerchief. Courtney was hugging herself against the wind, her heels sinking into the mud, and Preston stood apart from them, staring blankly at the ground. They did not have their furs. They did not have their jewelry. Beside them, piled in a heap, were black plastic trash bags. The same kind of bags they used for garbage were now filled with their designer clothes. It was all they had been allowed to take. Malik watched them go by. He did not look angry anymore. He just looked relieved. "Do you want to stop?" he asked quietly. I looked at Preston one last time. I saw the man who had called me a burden. I saw the family that had tried to destroy me for sport. "No," I said, facing forward. "Keep driving." The driver accelerated, and the image of the Miller family faded into the darkness behind us. They were just a memory now, a bad investment that I had finally written off. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I saw the same woman who had walked into that house 2 hours ago. I was wearing the same clothes. I had the same face. But to them, I had transformed into a monster. They made the mistake that arrogant people always make. They judged the book by its cover. They saw silence and mistook it for weakness. They saw thrift and mistook it for poverty. They thought I was a lost lamb entering a wolf's den. They thought they could circle me and tear me apart. They did not know that I own the forest. They did not know that the wolf does not howl before it strikes. I settled back into the seat as the lights of the city appeared on the horizon. Never underestimate a woman just because she chooses to live simply. You never know what she is hiding in her pocket or in her bank account. The most powerful lesson we can draw from the story of Jordan Hill and the Miller family is the danger of equating appearance with reality. We live in a world that is obsessed with status symbols, where a luxury car or a designer handbag is often mistaken for a character reference. The Millers fell into the fatal trap of arrogance, believing that their perceived wealth made them superior to everyone else. They judged Jordan based on the age of her car and the brand of her clothes, assuming that simplicity meant poverty. They failed to realize that true wealth does not need to shout to be heard. Jordan represents the concept of stealth wealth. She understands that financial freedom is not about what you display to the world, but about what you own and control behind the scenes. She drives a reliable car because she understands depreciation. She wears vintage clothes because she values quality over trends. Her power comes from her competence and her assets, not from the validation of others. The Millers, on the other hand, represent the fragility of a lifestyle built on debt and the desperate need to impress strangers. Their downfall was not caused by bad luck, but by their own hubris. They underestimated Jordan because they were too blinded by their own reflection to see the sharks swimming in their tank. This story serves as a stark reminder to treat every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their attire or their vehicle. You never know who is sitting across the table from you. The quiet person in the corner might be the one holding the deed to your house. In business and in life, the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful one. Real power is often silent, observant, and incredibly patient. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice, revenge, and the hidden side of the wealthy elite.